All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give people a few more minutes, or seconds, I should say, to join before we get started. Great. So thank you all for joining our panel discussion. First, I want to get a few logistics out of the way. This panel discussion is being recorded and will be available on demand in Synaptiq's website going forward. In the attachment section of this webinar, we have a landing page with a form you can use to sign up to get involved and stay in touch with our COVID-19 research project. We also have more context on the teams and their members. You are encouraged to ask questions throughout the webinar using the question mark icon in the right channel, and we will save time at the end of the panel for Q&A. This webinar is organized by Synaptiq, a full-scale artificial intelligence consultancy. Synaptiq comprises over 20 professionals with backgrounds in management consulting, AI research, and applications to partner with each client to provide unique and impactful solutions. Thank you all for joining us for this update on our COVID-19 AI and data research project. Now, with that out of the way, allow me to introduce myself and our panelists. I'm Erskine. I'm a volunteer on this project, and I'm currently an engineering director at eBay. I've been in the high-tech industry for 20 years as a software engineer and then as a manager. I've worked with companies like Intel, Barclays Global Investors, Fujitsu Biosciences, and Jive Software before landing at eBay. I have a bachelor's degree in cognitive science and biochemistry from the University of Virginia. Now let's get to know our speakers. Akshay is a Synaptiq partner and founder of Keratin, an AI-based search and knowledge discovery startup. He is a computer science doctoral candidate at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, researching knowledge-based systems. Welcome, Akshay. Ralph is also a volunteer on Synaptiq's COVID-19 project. He's a PhD physicist, technologist, and entrepreneur with contributions in the fields of environmental protection, emergency response, space industrialization, human-computer interface, and educational apps. He has founded companies for air pollution studies, chemical plant safety, pen computing, and 3D virtual worlds for collaboration. He has served as founder, chairman, CEO, president, CTO, VP of R&D, and almost everything else, including janitor. Welcome, Ralph. Thanks for being with us. Thank you both for being here. As you may recall, in March of 2020, the United States woke up to the reality of the COVID-19 pandemic. News outlets across the country barraged the public with countless stories about the growing threat. Stories were shared and expounded upon online, in many cases without supporting facts, stoking greater and greater public fear. Outside of a few government agencies and academic institutions, most commercial organizations were quiet. It was around this time that Steven Sclarou, CEO of Synaptiq, was glued to the news. One of the studies he read mentioned that Google was hosting a Kaggle competition using public COVID-19 data. Steven reached out to Dr. Tim Oates, chief data scientist of Synaptiq and professor at UMBC, to discuss what Synaptiq could do to help in this global challenge. From this discussion, Dr. Oates invited one of his PhD grad students, Akshay, who's with us today, into the conversation. The three decided to pull together a small team of volunteer data science practitioners, researchers, and Synaptiq's head of marketing, Portia Roberts, to kick some ideas around. Our first webinar on this project got about 1,000 viewings. We surveyed these viewers in our network to better understand their interest in the project. Based on the feedback, we made a few changes to our team structure and added additional volunteers and advisors. Synaptiq's COVID-19 data research project now has volunteers in several different countries and advisors with expertise in epidemiology, public and healthcare policy. We're now ready to share an update, and we have some specific ways we would like our audience to engage. So Akshay and Ralph, I'm going to ask you each to walk us through a product brief describing your team's efforts in more detail. Please describe the overall problem being addressed by the team and who it will benefit. After that, I'd love for the audience to get a sense for the current status. And finally, we'd love to hear what comes next and what help you might need from prospective volunteers. Let's start with Ralph. I understand you have some slides prepared, so I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Erskine. I'd like to share my screen. Our charter was engaging machine vision and other cutting-edge technologies is the key to a novel, affordable solution for small businesses.
And Rob, sorry to interrupt, but I'm not actually seeing your content. So I wonder if you could.
I have the wrong screen. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. This should help. That work?
Still gray for us. And Akshay, are you able to see anything?
No, it's gray.
Interesting. You don't see what's on the screen?
We do not.
I don't know what's happening wrong. Maybe we can switch and I'll work on it while Akshay talks.
Sure, why don't we give that a go? Akshay, are you ready to present us the product brief? So
Sure.
Just to reiterate, we'll do a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve in the audience, and then working through status and next steps and any help you may need.
Sure. So the idea behind Carotene when we started off, even before COVID, was trying to understand what are the pain points when people use search today. And one of our focus groups during the discovery process was researchers, scientists in the industry as well as in academia. And the key pain point that they've always cited is time-consuming experience when they're doing keyword searches, and then there's a lot of inaccuracy, and the experience of just generating a laundry list of items is not very conducive, and productivity losses are great. And we've observed the same when we've spoken to people at research enterprises, market research enterprises. So that was the motivation behind trying to do something about it through Carotene. And then when we started off with this whole research project, and we visited this aspect in the previous webinar, where I spoke about how researchers can have higher productivity when they can search better. So the whole motivation behind Carotene, as well as this particular offering for COVID researchers, practitioners, is to enable them to search better and easier. So the whole experience spans around that. The general product is a search tool, which allows people to use natural language descriptions the way we talk to each other, use that to talk to the search engine, versus the traditional way of actually translating our thoughts into keywords and then trying to make the engine understand what we're trying for. And I'll just do a quick demo of where we stand right now. Let me know once you can see my screen.
We got it.
Okay, give me a second. So I'll just quickly run through two specific search queries, and they're very natural language based. And I'll take a moment to read through the query so that the viewers can understand what's going on, because it's a lot of text. So this is the query which comes from one of the challenges that was posted on Kaggle for researchers in the machine learning, AI, and text analytics space, to help make sense and answer specific requirements out of research publications that are already out there and that continue to be published on COVID. So this query is very generic. It just deals with public policy and how collaboration can be achieved within a country, across country borders, and what are the standards, and what are the risks, and what are the standard international policies when it comes to this kind of communication. So this is basically a query that's pretty long. And
it's a little small on our screen, so can you read it out for us?
Sure. Let me do that. So the query is basically what has been published about information sharing and intersectoral collaboration. The second question is what has been published about data standards and nomenclature. Third question is what has been published about government public policy. And the fourth question in the query is what do we know about risk communication. So it's basically a very umbrella kind of search for public policy issues when it comes to collaboration and data sharing about medical information, which is very personal and private. So that's the query. Our initial screen, we're following this very email kind of interaction where on the left-hand side, you see a list of results that are paginated for you. So you'll see 10 at a time. So this is a very linear approach, which is similar to regular search engines, except there's secret sauce happening in the background behind the scenes, where Caratine's knowledge graph and knowledge engine kind of kicks in and enables a different kind of search scoring. We also have blips over here, which are color-coded. They basically tell you how relevant this particular result is to the original search query. All of this is happening based on concepts that are specified in the search query. Whenever you click on a particular result, the right-hand side shows you all the information about that particular research artifact. And this is basically the information associated with every research publication: the title, authors, link to get the full text research publication, the abstract. And these are concepts that Caratine's knowledge engine actually extracts from every publication or every document that it sees without relying on any external data source. So we don't need a million documents to be really good at understanding what the themes are. Caratine's engine works on a single document without any background knowledge. So these are basically the knowledge, the key concepts or themes that this artifact deals with. Additionally, the related artifacts section here allows people to see publications at a deeper level that are related to these concepts here. For example, planning for pandemics, governance-related articles, and people can use this list to deep dive into these particular concepts. So if you click on any one of them, you basically get another pane which helps you understand metadata about each of these articles in depth. And again, you can navigate to the full text of that particular research artifact.
And
so,
sorry to interrupt again, but is it possible to make your screen a little bigger for those who are viewing?
My screen's maximized. Like it's consuming the whole.
Can you make the font any bigger?
Okay, that's going to mess up the styling, but I'll try. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's better. Just one more notch there. Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's messed up the styling because I'm kind of maximizing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as I was saying, you could look at each individual related artifact and dig deeper into these particular concepts. Let me just zoom out quickly because otherwise people won't be able to see everything. So this is one aspect where you've got a very different experience when you're searching and how you can do breadth and depth based exploration of research. Additionally, we have something called concept stacks. Concept stacks this is something that is under development right now. But if I can go back to, if we go back to the search query, right? The search query was talking about how to communicate, what are the risks of communication, what are the policies for intersectoral collaboration. So each of these cards has a title, which are each title is basically a concept that the user search query was trying to look for or trying to address, and verbatim. And then the cards or the entries that you see at the bottom are actual concepts that are discussed in the research publications, in this case, the data set being the coronavirus open research data set. They're basically concepts that Caratine has identified from the research artifacts, and they are kind of placed in the same card as their original query concept. So what this means is the user was talking about risk communication, and these are the concepts that have been identified and are actively discussed in research publications that Caratine has identified. Further, the green color, the degree of the greenness actually is a color coding scheme which tells the user that high risk is a very critical concept that is discussed very frequently in the research artifacts that Caratine has access to. Similarly, if you go to data standards, right, there's a lot of discussion about big data, but predominantly people are in research are discussing how to collect data and what the data sets are typically. Intersectoral collaboration, again, publications are pretty distributed between private sector, public sector, collaboration, health sector. Now, this is an interaction that we're trying to build where users can actively, click on each of these or any of these concepts and construct queries to further explore research. So that's under development. And the third aspect, which is also under development, is a data scientist from Synaptiq called Saurav, who's working on something called graph embeddings, which is a very abstract machine learning way or AI way of creating a huge graph of different kinds of entities. In this case, it could be research publications, words that kind of describe what the research publication is talking about. And something which is very novel that has come up from his work is he's able to figure out what are the electronic health record or diagnostic codes for each condition that the user may be searching for. So in this case, if it's coronavirus, he's actually able to bring out the diagnostic codes associated with coronavirus symptoms. And that's the third thing that's under development from the team. And I'll quickly, how am I doing on time? Do I have time?
You've got some more time if you want to go into a little more detail.
Okay, I can quickly run through another query, which is, so this query was something that everyone was trying to look for early on in the pandemic. And then if we go for a more specific query, and let me see if I can magnify this so that everyone can see. Is it visible now?
It is.
Okay. So this query is basically talking about COVID-19 and how COVID-19 particles are, attaching to surfaces, different kinds of surfaces. What is the survival rate? And then it also talks about decontamination, and viral shedding is basically people shedding viruses onto surfaces. So that's the query. Now, if we run a discovery on that. Okay, so I'm back to the consolidated results. So again, here we're talking about survival. So the first result is very generic, which is the survival of microorganisms on inanimate surfaces. This is because the user query was talking more about survival rates, and this is a critical concept that Carotene has identified in the research that it has access to. And then the second one is, again, transmission through surfaces of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. Like I said, left-hand side is basically search results with a very new scoring mechanism and active user feedback on what's most relevant to their particular user query. So if I just go to the next page, right, you see the color coding turns orange because that's less and less relevant to the user's queries. And then in this case, if you go to the concept stacks, certain abstract concepts like physical science, and it talks about physical distancing and stuff like that. And then there's addition, where cell addition to different surfaces is a key concept. And then there's a whole bunch of concepts about different kinds of surfaces, survival in different kinds of environments, and then how viral shedding happens. So there's a lot of publications that we see around viral RNA and how much it persists when the viral load is shed by humans. So yeah, I just wanted to run by a second set of queries. In terms of timeline, we are looking to do a public beta launch in the middle of July. And we are actively looking for people to come out and test the platform, tell us where we are doing well, where we are not doing well. If they see results that absolutely make no sense, or the scoring doesn't make sense, or something's broken on the platform, we'd like people to come and test the platform out before we go for a full public release. And yeah, we're looking for volunteers or people who just want to test it out and have some time on their hands to tell us how the platform's working. That would be awesome. Typically, we would want a few subject matter experts who understand this space, who have certain queries that they can come up with, both small queries, long queries, very diverse kind of queries, and tell us how the platform performs. We do have, and that's the thing I didn't mention. So for every result, right, we have these buttons where users can give us feedback by clicking the tick mark saying, okay, this result's good. And if you want to, if there's something wrong with the result, you can actually tell us, and this is under development, you can actually tell us why there's something wrong. Do you not see enough information? Do you see some problem with the ranking? Stuff like that. So yeah, that's our call to action. That's what we are looking for right now as a team.
Fantastic. And just as a reminder, in the attachment section of this webinar, there is a form you can fill out to volunteer to participate as a subject matter expert. And we definitely appreciate the help and the feedback on the beta.
Sure. And we'll also be sending out registration for beta users where people can actually, even if they miss the email from Synaptiq, they can come onto the Carotene website and register their emails for this purpose.
Outstanding. Great. Well, so let's have Ralph present the same spiel, and I will share presentation on his behalf.
Thank you.
So stand by 1 moment.
Great. As I was saying, our charter is engaging machine vision and other cutting-edge technologies, which are key to a novel, affordable solution for small businesses to ensure their employees and customers' safety. Next slide. What we took that to mean is our problem is ensuring employees and customers' safety, and it's for small businesses that need affordable solutions. What we came up with is Qualified Illness Risk System, QIRS, pronounced CURES. Next slide. CURES' purpose is to fight COVID-19 for your business, employees, and customers. It's to screen your entries, people coming into your business. Next slide. The design criteria we used is keep it simple. We're using questions and answers and measurements. We're using QR codes that point to both programs and data, and we result in a color badge that is easily used to show your illness risk. All data is to be private and secure. We're not loading any private data up to the cloud. It all stays on your phone. And finally, the user's characteristics, which are necessary for identity verification, we're choosing to make 90% rejection rather than 90% acceptance and identification. Next slide.
Well, so I'm going to ask for a little clarification on what you mean by that.
Instead of trying to get facial recognition, for example, we're just trying to verify a person is who they say they are and reject people who are trying to spoof, but not trying to identify the person.
Oh, I get you. That makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Next slide. Our unique features. We're assessing risk by health exposure and test questions. We're trying to integrate vital signs, activity, sleep for better future assessments and prediction. Now, we're trying to integrate this whole thing. Most models and screening apps are doing only part of the solution. We think this whole thing is necessary. Finally, we're trying to verify a person's identity by characteristics and not recognition. We're using QR codes for programs and data access, and we're trying to do everything open source so we can share with everyone that's interested. Next slide. Let me give you a scenario. Say you're trying to go into a local business and you see a sign in the window. It says, safe to enter, low risk badge from cures.app is required, and a QR code. So you run the QR code, and lo and behold, this pops up on your phone, the first screen of the app. And it tells you what this is all about. The next thing that happens when you advance from here is, next slide, is you see the questionnaire, where you just touch the answer, yes, possibly no, to health questions, exposure questions, and even if you've taken COVID tests. Next slide. We'll optionally allow you to put in health measurements. Now, these are going to make the advancement much, much better to where we can actually use this someday to determine your illness risk. But things like an activity bracelet, where you get heart rate, sleep score, steps, miles, and so forth, or a pressure on a blood pressure cuff, or an oximeter. Also, there are now phone video systems using the camera on your phone that do things like heart and breathing rates, stress. I'd suggest, if no one has tried it, that they go to and get an app in their app store called ANURA, Anura. It's free, and it allows you to try getting some of these vitals directly from your camera of your phone. Next slide. After that, you get your badge. If you haven't had any symptoms or exposure, you get a low-risk badge. And that includes another QR code and the date, because the badge expires every day. Next slide. When you enter, the business scans your badge, verifies your identity, and you're free to go in. We're doing everything manual now, but future it'll be automated, where a lot of this data will be collected without you having to tap answers. Next slide. Evolution. We're going from putting in health exposure and test results manually today and assessing them with a heuristic algorithm that's not really based on data, to a future where we can use machine learning algorithm with thousands of cases, not only questions, but maybe the measurements from other equipment. We're trying to verify identity so we don't get spoofed. Right now, we'll probably use age, sex, height, weight, hair, and eye color. In the future, we'll use neural network attributes in the layer before the facial identification layer. We're using vital signs. Again, now we have to mentally enter them from additional equipment. But in the future, we'll have things like Anura, but built in, so it can take vital signs from your finger or your face through a video system. Next slide.
Sorry.
Well, why use it? Well, it lowers risk. It lowers risk for customers concerned about entering a business. It lowers risk for the workers inside the business. It lowers risk for the business. It states that they take safety seriously. Next slide. Remember our charter? Engaging machine vision and other cutting-edge technology is key to a novel, affordable solution for business to ensure their employees' and customers' safety. Next slide. Well, where Cures is right now is it's a standalone system. It's just entering prototype. I can show it running on my phone. It's based on questions and answers. We'll have manual entry of optional measurements. It uses on-phone data storage. None of the data goes up into the cloud. Users' characteristics are bound up along with the date and the color in the QR code. So when it's scanned, the business scanning your badge knows who you are based on these characteristics. And finally, the QR code on your badge triggers the business's phone to run the program that verifies your color, your date, and your identity. Next slide. We need volunteers. We need all sorts of volunteers. We need front-end designers and developers to complete a releasable system. All we have now is a prototype or demo. We need expertise in HTML5, JavaScript, graphical display of data. We want to be able to give people graphical representations of the data they put in from their various devices, because we think in the end, indicating illness will come about from variations in historical data. And of course, we need localization. This is not meant to be just for English-speaking countries. This is a system that could be used worldwide. We need to automate the acquisition of the measurements from other software, from other equipment that uploads into their own software. So if you have any of those expertise, we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to have you volunteer. Then we need back-end developers, because eventually, to prevent spoofing, we'll need to have this data go up to a cloud, not the person's health data or any of the detailed data coming from their equipment, but their illness risk score, the date, and their identifying characteristics so we can prove their identity. Finally, we need data scientists for the machine learning AI that will run on a person's phone. We want to be able to convert health, exposure, and testing answers into illness risk based on data. We want to integrate measurements into that illness risk score. And we want to extract vital signs from a finger or facial video. Now, again, I told you this is already being done by some companies, but we want to have a program that's integrated into our app. Next slide. However, the biggest challenge is marketing. It's not the technology of making this, but getting it used by small businesses and people. Cures is a real solution and it needs use. Everyone can help us. Get you and your friends to start using it, and then to the stores where you shop, get them to use it. If we work together, we can reduce COVID-19 illnesses. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ralph. And let me get back to my screen here. Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I mean, to spread virally, if you just want to use it within your sphere of your social sphere, to basically say, hey, before we go out and take a walk in the park or whatever, let's verify that we're each at low risk for having COVID. That's one way it could spread just amongst a social circle. Because as the states are starting to open up, you still aren't sure like who's been where or what they've had contact with. So I mean, you starts with your social circle and then you expand out to businesses and workplaces.
I think of it being useful for small businesses, for factories where people are working in close proximity, for public transportation where we're having to crowd together, for events, even public events where we end up being shoulder to shoulder. We need some way to reduce our risk and to be able to assess the risk of going in. If a store has the sign in the window, when going in, you'll be fairly safe. And the people inside are fairly safe by your entry because you have a green badge. Excellent.
Very cool. And I'm keen to see what the audience thinks and if they have any comments or questions. So far, it's a little quiet. So if you're listening in, please feel free to ask us questions. And going back to Akshay's presentation, you mentioned the concept stacks. Is the ultimate goal to make those interactive, so navigatable?
Yeah, so it's a two-pronged approach. One is the fact that we can bring those concept stacks up from the knowledge graph. It kind of tells us that we can use that information to help the user's query become better.
Gotcha.
At search time as well as afterwards. So the interactive part comes after the user searched, right? But on the first screen itself, when the users put in this big query, and I forgot to mention this, but the way the Carotene engine works is the query can be as long as you want. In theory, right? In practice, it may be different because we also, on a different platform, we allow people to upload text files or PDF files, which could be research synopses or abstracts or executive summaries of their project. And then the engine, it takes time because in that case, it won't be a real-time query. It'll be queued up, and then you'll get a notification once the query is run in the backend. So when you have so many concepts going on, it's very hard to guess what the user's requirements are. Do they want a very refined kind of focused result set where the user is like, okay, I'm going to tell you 10 concepts and I want an overlap of 10 concepts in the results, right? Which may be hard to find. Some users might be, okay, give me all the overlaps. If I'm talking about intercultural, cultural aspects which impact the spread of a pandemic. And then I'm also talking about SARS-CoV-2, but then there's SARS in there. So why don't you show me results of MERS and cultural spread, right? Or cultural factors that have been studied for spread. So it's hard to guess. The way concept stacks come in is basically weighing each concept that the user is talking about. In this case, if the user is talking about COVID, cultural norms, and spread on surfaces, right? The knowledge engine can actually identify that the fact that the user is talking has SARS or SARS-CoV-2 in their query, that is a very important keyword, and everything else is a subset. Like if you think of it in terms of a hierarchy, right? The disease is at the top, and then various factors that you use to discuss the disease, like the spread of the disease on through air, spread of the disease through contact, human-to-human contact, spread of the disease through surfaces, right? These are secondary. The primary concept is the actual disease. So the knowledge graph can actually help identify what's the core of the query and what are the sub-concepts. So that is an automated aspect of knowledge discovery. And then the concept stacks, once they become interactive, help the user kind of click on different concepts and be like, okay, this is what I'm more interested in right now, and let's create a query out of these concepts that I click, right? For example, when the screen about risk communication came up, right? Risk communication was in the user query, but then there's publications that Carotene sees which have high risk, low risk, and risk of spread and whatnot, right? Like these different concepts. So then the user's imagination kind of comes into play, where the user sees all these different concepts, and the user is like, okay, let's talk about high risk. High risk of then they can select contaminant surfaces. So what kind of hydrophilic surface, and low risk, and hydrophilic surface and high risk, and they can create their own query from there on, and they're guaranteed to get results. And in that interaction, it's going to be an overlap. We're not going to give you all the results under the sun which have just low risk or just have hydrophilic surfaces. It's actually going to be you kind of converging onto the results that you want. So that's the idea behind the concept stacks.
Oh, that's great. And so you said the beta will be available in the mid-July timeframe.
Yes.
Excellent.
So that will be a restricted beta. It won't be a fully public beta. That's when we want subject matter experts to come in and kind of tell us, here's where you suck, here's where you're doing well, and then we kind of address it before we go for a full public launch.
Very cool.
Akshay, what is the limit on the library you're running against?
I'm sorry, can I say that again?
What's the limit on the library you're running against?
The limit in terms of the query?
Who's keeping it up to date?
Oh, so the data that this solution's using is the COVID Open Research dataset. It's called CORD-19. It's actively maintained by Synaptiq Scholar, and it's made public without any royalty. We are actually, the team is keeping everything up to date. They release a new version or an updated version of the dataset every week, and we actually pull that version and update our indexes.
Great.
So right now it's semi-automatic in that we have to pull the data from them because it's not an incremental update or incremental release. They basically package everything together. So today, if it's 1 gigabyte of data, next week it's going to be the old 1 gigabyte plus 10 or 1,000 publications that came up between this week and the next. So we have to do it kind of manually in terms of downloading it and indexing it.
Since I'm most interested in the screening, does it have papers on screening?
Yes, it does have papers on screening.
We have to talk.
Yeah. So we are also trying to get new data sets in, patent data sets. So the patent data set, USPTO data set, is something that we are separately indexing as a different offering. It's part of our pilot program at Carotene. We are trying to, I'm personally trying to understand if we can just figure out patents related to anything that's useful to COVID, right? And just index that, because we don't want to give users random patent results which have nothing to do with medical devices. It could be a medical device, but nothing to do with COVID, right? So we are trying to plug in new data sets, but that's again pending for future release. I think that's something Ralph would be kind of interested in, trying to understand what IP protections are in place for different kinds of screening technologies, right, and devices.
Right.
In
So we're
theory,
trying to stay open source, so we want everybody to be able to have access to ours, but we will have problems in a minefield of other people having closed up roads.
yeah, and in theory, I mean, this could be not just medical publications, but any factual data that we want to index and serve up a query interface for.
Sure.
So journalists, I imagine, could be a long-term consumer of this solution as well.
Yes, so journalists can search. The one challenge that I think a lot of people will face this challenge in academic research as well. This data set comes to us as a collective of papers without, we're still trying to understand if we can identify which of these publications are preprint only. Which of these are preprint as well as under review, and which of these could be tagged as preprint, but they're also published. They've been peer reviewed and published somewhere else. It's very, right now, we're trying to figure out how to identify these, because that will be of keen interest to every reader and every user of the platform. Because there's a whole bunch of research out there. Most of them are preprint. They're still working papers, right? So users, journalists specifically, right? If they come onto the platform and start searching for the latest, research in, let's say, screening, and they need to know which of those are preprints, and then they use their journalistic code or ethic to understand how to report on these particular preprint only publications versus peer-reviewed publications.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most surprising discovery on the road to developing this prototype?
User experience design for a data scientist is a really hard thing.
Yeah.
I've developed a bunch of dashboards, but then it's few and far in between, and every year technology is evolving. So now when I'm sitting down and I'm like, in the time I've spent on developing this user interface, I could have written a few models of machine learning to try and figure out if the engine could work better, right? But it's that was one challenge. The second challenge, of course, domain expertise. You can do all this fantastic work, but then you need someone, either it's you or someone on the team or someone from outside, who tells you for this particular domain, are the results right or not? Does the experience make sense? Now, me being in research, I understand that there's a certain workflow that researchers follow for literature survey and literature review, and it's a very iterative process, right? As your research goes forward, you still want to discover new research, just in case someone trumped your method. But subject matter experts related to this domain and that expertise is a key challenge, because to a lame reader, we just look at words and say, okay, fantastic results. Some subject matter expert might come in and say, okay, these words are the same, but the semantic meaning is completely different, right? So yeah, like risk communication and risk of communication, they may seem the same or may be different depending on on different domains, right? So that's the kind of challenge that the team's facing, actually.
Well, just to remind the audience, there is an opportunity to sign up as a subject matter expert through the attachments section of this webinar. So we certainly encourage your participation. It's some very exciting stuff. And Ralph, talk to me a little bit about how your team formed. Not so much about how the team formed, but how these ideas, how you got to the state of this prototype that you're talking about.
We've had team meetings weekly. We have people from many different countries. We're very concerned about the privacy requirements of the EU. We have the head of our team is actually in industry, in a plant, in a manufacturing plant. And one of the early things he did is buy a very expensive temperature system so that when workers come in his plant, they get scanned for temperature. But unfortunately, temperature isn't the be all and end all for COVID. and many people entering the hospital with COVID don't show an elevated temperature.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly is one symptom that could be exhibited, but it's not definitive in either suggesting you have COVID or not having a temperature is indicative you do not have COVID.
Right. Right.
The symptoms for COVID have turned out so varied, and people don't have them all. And there are many cases where the COVID tests themselves, the nasal swabs and the saliva tests, have not proven definitive. And even after repeat, they still show negative results, and the person really has COVID, is in the hospital, and they deal with it as a COVID infection, even though there was no test showing it. It's a really harsh disease.
I wonder, because what's the current? Did you all explore the current state of antibody testing and like whether that could be a factor in
antibody testing? It has its own problems. Imagine you have an antibody test that is very good and only returns a 5% false positive. So if you do not have COVID, 5% of the time you'd show a positive. Now, if you have a population with, let's say, 5% people having had COVID, and you take roughly 100 people, you'd expect 5% of them, 5 people, to have COVID positive tests because they have COVID, and 5 people to have COVID positive tests because of the test inaccuracy.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with 10 people getting positive results. Now, the arithmetic's a little bit off, but it's close to it. You have 10 people with COVID positive test results, but only 5 of them have COVID. So it's a 50% error rate.
Right.
That's the problem with the testing, the antibody testing. If we had a much higher incidence of COVID recovery, it'd be much more accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the way it is, you're roughly looking at 50% chance if it says you've already had COVID, that you really have. And at that point, if you think you're invulnerable, you're in trouble. This symptom testing, and especially testing the vital signs for a person, may turn out to be even more powerful. There's been studies where vital signs have changed up to 3 days before overt symptoms of COVID. In other words, they're able to predict with what they claim to be a 90% effective rate that you will be coming down with an illness like COVID, or specifically COVID.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm very excited to collect vital signs and our questionnaire, so we can build a database that can, with machine learning, tell us that you have it or that you're coming down with it enough for you to have a risk assessment that makes meaningful sense and keeps us all safer.
And have you gone as far as exploring the HealthKit APIs on the Apple side of the ecosystem?
Pardon me?
Have you gone as far as in exploring some of the HealthKit APIs on the Apple ecosystem?
I know of them. I have not explored them, both there and on Android. That's one of the tasks we hope to have some volunteers help with. Each operating system has a app that does fitness and tries to put together all these other things. And if we can tap into that, we may have a way of integrating automatically, which we think would be tremendously helpful. But I want to emphasize, if people have an opportunity, go to your app store, pull down this app, Anura, A-N-U-R-A, and try it out. All you do is look at the camera for 30 seconds, and it tells you things like your heart rate variability, which is a big measure of the stress in your system, including illness. It, in that particular one, actually monitors and predicts, measures a blood pressure, all from a free app that you look at a camera for 30 seconds. It's very exciting. And it's AI, it's machine learning.
Yeah, that's borderline incredible. That's fascinating. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm not seeing any questions. So do you guys have any parting thoughts, or shall we wrap this up?
I have a quick question for Ralph, actually. So this whole tool, right? You've been talking about stores a lot as the end user. Do you see a lot of scope of use and effectiveness when it comes to assisted living homes?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm in a group that works with seniors in the Washington, D.C. area. And we've been talking about this app and actually the video screening for vital signs. And there's a ring that people can buy, a ring to wear on your finger called the Oura, O-U-R-A ring, that actually measures continually vital signs, temperature, and heart rate variability, and has been shown to be able to do this 3-day projection of coming down with symptoms. Imagine what it would mean if we can detect that you're coming down with COVID 3 days earlier and you isolate. That means 3 days you don't interact, and your ability to infect others seems to be strongest in those days before you come down with overt symptoms. And the tests we have for COVID are least accurate in those days before you come down with overt. So everything points to we ought to bring more technology to bear and not rely on some standard things that have been put out there.
Very cool. Any other parting thoughts or comments?
No, I just can't wait to try the database and searching on its screening technologies.
I know. This is very exciting stuff and very fruitful exploration by both teams. I want to give a final shout out to Synaptiq for hosting the effort and providing collaboration tools and infrastructure for supporting the development of this tool set, or these tool sets, I should say. And I want to thank you both, Akshay and Ralph, for your time and efforts in preparing this content. It's fascinating stuff. And I want to thank our audience for joining in and listening to this important work. And of course, this content will be available on the Synaptiq website going forward. So share with your friends, give us a good star rating, and we'll talk to you on the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.